They say a man never truly outruns the people who raised him, he only rides far enough to forget their faces. But on the night Caleb Rourke stole a horse to save a native girl, forgetting was no longer an option. The wind cut sharp across the Wyoming plains, dragging snow like broken glass along the ground. Caleb felt it sting his cheeks as he pressed his forehead to the warm neck of the chestnut mare in the livery stable. She snorted softly, sensing the fear in him. He whispered to her anyway, the way his father once whispered before every long ride, slow, steady, like prayer. "I won't take long," he murmured. "Just one hard run." Outside, the frontier town of Red Hollow slept under lantern glow and frost. Inside the jailhouse, a young girl waited in chains. Caleb had not planned to come back to Red Hollow. Not after the men who raised him, the Rourke bros, had turned from ranchers into hunters, and from hunters into something meaner. Not after he'd ridden away at 16 with blood on his knuckles and his father's last words ringing in his ears. "If you ever stand against us, boy, don't expect mercy." But then Caleb had seen her. She was no more than 14, hair braided tight, face bruised but unbroken. The town called her a thief. The sheriff called her Indian trouble. Red Hollow didn't hang girls, but it handed them back to men who would. Men like the Rourkes. Caleb eased the saddle cinch tight and swung up, breath steaming. He slipped the stable door open and led the mare into the street, boots silent on packed snow. The church bell loomed above him, black against the stars. Midnight. He rode straight for the jail. Caleb eased the saddle cinch tight and swung up, breath steaming. He slipped the stable door open and led the mare into the street, boots silent on packed snow. The church bell loomed above him, black against the stars. Midnight. He rode straight. The church bell loomed above him, black against the stars. Midnight. He rode straight for the jail. Inside, the sheriff barely had time to reach for his gun before Caleb's fist met his jaw. The man crumpled like wet paper. Caleb's heart hammered not from the fight, but from the sound it made. Too loud, too final. Viaka didn't cry out when he unlocked her chains. She only watched him, dark eyes sharp and searching. "Can you ride?" Caleb whispered. She nodded once. By the time the alarm bell rang, they were already tearing out of town, hooves pounding thunder across the frozen earth. The wind howled as if warning them to turn back. Caleb didn't. Behind them, Red Hollow woke in shouts and gunfire. They rode hard through the night, across open plains and into broken hills where moonlight caught on rock and snow. Viaka clung to him, light as breath, trusting a stranger with everything she had left. At dawn, they stopped beneath a stand of bare cottonwoods. Caleb slid from the saddle, hands shaking. He tore strips from his shirt to wrap her wrists where the irons had bitten. "Why?" she asked finally, voice soft but steady. Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared east, where the sky bled red over the horizon. "Because once," he said, "someone should have done the same for me." They didn't have long. By mid-morning, tracks would be easy to follow, and the Rourkes were the best riders in 3 territories. By noon, Caleb spotted them 5 figures cresting a distant ridge, coats dark against the snow, rifles slung low. His stomach turned to ice. Viaka followed his gaze. "They are yours," she said, not asking. Caleb nodded. "They raised me." She searched his face. "Then they will not stop." "No," he said. "They won't." He could have turned south, could have vanished into the mountains like smoke. But the land ahead sloped downward toward the Rourke ranch, the place where his mother was buried. where his father taught him to ride, where mercy had been beaten out of boys and replaced with obedience. Caleb swung back into the saddle and pulled Vieka close. "If they catch us," he said, "stay behind me. No matter what you hear." The riders behind them spread out, moving fast now. Caleb felt the old fear rise, the one he thought he'd buried years ago. He dug his heels into the mare's sides and turned her toward the valley, straight toward the men who raised him. As the first rifle cracked through the air, Caleb knew there would be no turning back, and no one would ride away unchanged. The first bullet split the air just above Caleb's shoulder, snapping bark from a cottonwood behind them. The mare screamed and surged forward, her muscles bunching beneath them like coiled steel. Caleb leaned low, one hand gripping the reins. The other braced around Vieka, as the valley opened before them, wide, white, and unforgiving. The Rourkes were gaining. He knew their riding patterns as well as his own breath. Elias would push hard on the left, trying to cut them off near the creek. Jonah would stay back, steady and patient, waiting for a clean shot. And at the center, riding like a shadow that never tired, would be Silas Rourke, Caleb's older brother, in everything but blood, the man who had taught him how to shoot straight and feel nothing. "They won't shoot the girl," Caleb muttered to himself. "Not yet." Vieka heard the strain in his voice. "They will," she said quietly, "when they stop needing her." Those words cut deeper than the wind. They thundered downhill hooves, tearing up frozen grass. As the ranch came into view, the long barn crouched against the slope, the house standing crooked and familiar. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was awake. Caleb's chest tightened. Memories crashed over him in fragments. His mother humming at the stove, his father's hands guiding his on the reins. Silas laughing as they raced across this same field, boys pretending they would never grow into men capable of cruelty. A shot rang out. The mare stumbled. Caleb's heart leaped into his throat, but she caught herself and kept running. He veered toward the creek, hoping the trees might buy them time. Snow exploded as another bullet struck the ground near their feet. "Caleb." A voice boomed behind them. Silas, the sound of his name, carried on the wind, nearly broke him. "Come back, brother," Silas called. "This doesn't have to end ugly." Caleb laughed bitterly. Too late for that. They reached the creek just as Elias cut them off, his horse skidding sideways, rifle already raised. Caleb yanked the reins, spinning the mare hard. Vieka cried out as they nearly toppled. Caleb drew his revolver and fired, not to kill, but to warn. Elias ducked, swearing, and the moment was enough. They crashed through the shallow water and climbed the opposite bank, lungs burning. Ahead, the old hunting cabin loomed, abandoned since Caleb's father died. He remembered patching its roof with his own hands, remembered hiding there once after Silas beat him bloody for refusing an order. He made his choice in a heartbeat. They burst through the cabin door as another bullet shattered the window. Caleb slammed it shut and dragged a heavy table against it. The walls shook with hoofbeats outside. Vieka stood tall, despite her trembling. "If they take me," she said, "they will hurt you." Caleb met her eyes. "If they take you," he said, "they'll have to go through me first." Silas dismounted slowly, boots crunching on snow. He didn't shout this time. "You don't belong with her," Silas said calmly. "You never did. You belong with us." Caleb stepped to the window, gun raised. "You taught me better than this." Silas smiled sadly. "No. I taught you to survive." Jonah circled the cabin. Elias reloaded, anger written across his face. Silas's voice softened. You think you're saving her. But the world doesn't change because you steal one girl from it. Caleb swallowed. His hands shook, but his aim stayed true. Maybe not, he said, but she will. A tense silence fell. Then Silas spoke again, quieter now. You know why your father died, don't you? The words hit like a punch. Caleb's breath caught. Don't. He turned against us, Silas continued. Just like you are now. Tried to stop a deal with the army. Thought mercy would save him. Viaca stiffened at the mention of the army. Silas's eyes hardened. Mercy gets men killed. Caleb felt something crack inside him, grief, rage, and understanding, all at once. You murdered him. Silas didn't deny it. Outside, the wind rose, moaning through the trees like a warning. There'll be soldiers here by nightfall, Silas said. You can walk away right now. Leave the girl. I'll tell them you died in the storm. Caleb looked at Viaca, at the bruises on her wrists, at the fire still burning in her eyes. He shook his head. I won't trade her life for mine. Silas sighed. Then you've made your choice. He raised his hand. The cabin door exploded inward under a hail of gunfire, wood splintering like bone. Caleb shoved Viaca down and returned fire, the world narrowing to smoke and sound and memory. As the cabin filled with chaos, Caleb realized the truth. With terrifying clarity, this wasn't just a chase anymore. It was a reckoning. The cabin fell silent after the last gunshot. It was the kind of heavy, pressing silence that makes a man question everything he's ever fought for, everything he's willing to die for. I leaned back against the rough, splintered wood of the cabin wall, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. A warm, sticky wetness seeped through my fingers where I clutched my side. Above me, smoke from the spent gunpowder drifted lazily towards the rafters, catching the faint light filtering through the dusty windows. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the low, nervous nickering of restless horses. Each beat of my heart was a painful throb, a stark reminder of how close I was to the end. Viaca knelt beside me. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the flickering firelight, but they were steady, filled with a resolve that shamed my own fear. She tore a long strip from her shawl without a moment's hesitation, and pressed it firmly against my wound. Her hands didn't shake. You are hurt, she said, her voice a quiet anchor in the ringing silence. Because of me. A faint, dry smile touched my lips. It probably looked more like a grimace. No, I managed to whisper, the words scraping my throat. I'm hurt because I finally stopped running. Just then, boots crunched heavily in the fresh snow outside. A long, dark shadow fell across the cabin floor, and Silas Rourke appeared in the doorway. He held his rifle loosely, pointed toward the ground, but it was ready. For a fleeting moment, he looked almost tired, older and more worn than I ever remembered him being. You always were a stubborn fool, Caleb, he said, his voice quiet, almost mournful. Your father's curse, through and through. At the mention of my father, something inside me turned to steel. The pain sharpened, but so did my focus. He wasn't a curse, I said, my voice stronger now, cutting through the haze of pain. He was the last good man you ever knew, Silas. My brother flinched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but I saw it. It was enough. Behind him, Elias and Jonah shifted their weight, their eyes darting nervously between me and the girl. They were hunters, calculating the risk, weighing the cost of finishing the job. Silas stepped slowly into the cabin, his boots making soft thuds on the wooden floor. He moved with a deliberate, careful grace, like a predator assessing its cornered prey. "Hand her over, Caleb," he said, his voice losing its weary edge, replaced by that familiar, cold command. "You'll bleed out before nightfall anyway. Don't make this any uglier than it has to be." With a surge of effort that sent fire screaming through my side, I pushed myself away from the wall. I swayed on my feet, my legs trembling, but I stood, planting myself squarely between him and Via Kappa. My voice, when I spoke, didn't waver. "If you take her," I said, meeting his gaze, "you'll have to live the rest of your lives knowing you just killed the last piece of humanity you had left inside you." Silas just stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Snowflakes drifted in through the open doorway, settling on the floor like fine white ash. Then, from somewhere far beyond the snow-laden trees, a new sound cut through the wind. Horns, not the sound of the wind whistling through the pines, but the clear, sharp call of cavalry horns. Silas's jaw tightened. He spun around just as a line of riders burst into the clearing. Us cavalry, their blue uniforms a stark contrast against the white snow, their rifles gleaming in the flat, gray light. Leading them was the sheriff of Red Hollow, a clean white bandage still wrapped around his head. Silas Rourke. The sheriff's voice boomed across the clearing, echoing off the trees. "By order of the territory, you and your men are under arrest for murder, kidnapping, and unlawful dealings with the army." Elias cursed under his breath, and his hand instinctively went for his gun. In an instant, a dozen rifles snapped up, all aimed directly at him. "Don't," Silas said, his voice sharp and final. Slowly, deliberately, Silas let his own rifle drop into the snow. One by one, Elias and Jonah followed his lead, their weapons falling with soft thuds. The clatter of chains and the crunch of boots filled the air as the soldiers moved in to secure them. As they led Silas past me, our eyes met one last time. There was no hatred in his gaze, only a deep, hollow resignation. "You could have ruled this whole land with us," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. I shook my head, the movement sending another jolt of pain through me. "No, Silas," I replied, my voice just as quiet. "I chose to protect it." He looked away then, and they led him off into the falling snow. And then, the last of my strength gave out. My legs buckled, and the world went dark. I woke days later to the gentle crackle of a fire and the comforting, earthy smell of boiled roots and pine smoke. The burning pain in my side was still there, but it was a dull, manageable ache now, not the sharp promise of death. I turned my head and saw Viaka sitting nearby, quietly grinding herbs in a small stone bowl. Her presence was calm, certain. It filled the small cabin with a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. "You stayed," I murmured, my voice hoarse. She looked up from her work, a small smile touching her lips. "You stayed first," she answered simply. She told me what had happened while I was lost to the fever. News of the Rourke's arrest had spread like wildfire. Her people, hearing that the valley was safe again, were beginning to return. They were drawn back by the chance to reclaim their home without fear. The land would heal, she said, her voice full of quiet confidence. And so would I, when I was finally strong enough to stand on my own. We walked outside together. The first signs of spring were cautiously pushing their way through the last of the winter snow. Patches of vibrant green broke through the blanket of white. Standing there, breathing in the crisp, clean air, I felt something I'd never felt before. I felt rooted, not trapped, like I had been my whole life, but chosen. As if this small cabin, this quiet valley, was where I was always meant to be. The morning Viaka left to rejoin her people was bright and clear. Before she went, she pressed a small, delicate feather into the palm of my hand. For courage, she said, her dark eyes meeting mine, not the kind that fights, the kind that stays. I stood there and watched her go, a lone figure moving gracefully through the trees, until she vanished from sight. Years passed. Travelers on the high plains sometimes spoke of a quiet man who lived in a cabin near a hidden valley. A man who offered weary strangers shelter without asking questions. A man who taught lost boys how to ride a horse without teaching them how to hate. They whispered stories about how he once rode against the very men who raised him, and won. Not with bullets, they'd say, but with mercy. And sometimes, when the sun dipped low and painted the endless plains in shades of gold and fire, Caleb Rourke would stand outside that cabin, tip his hat to the horizon, and feel a deep, quiet gratitude. He was grateful that one stolen horse, one desperate choice, had finally led him home, not to the violent past he'd run from, but to the man he was always meant to become. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.